Get a global perspective on the news before you call it a day. This is The World Tonight with Rob Breckenridge on AM770 CHQR.
Rob Breckenridge, The World Tonight. Welcome to this hour of the program. Once again, our telephone number, 403-974-8255. That's 403-974-TALK. Don't forget our website, AM770CHQR.com. We got some time for your calls coming up later in the hour, some other news to get to as well. But off the top in this hour, something, we certainly discussed a lot in this country over the years. I guess going back now, some 14 years since the National Long Gun Registry was brought in by the then Liberal government. There's been much debate about it. In 2006, the Conservatives promised as part of their election platform that they would get rid of the registry. Now, they did win that election and the subsequent one, but of course, on both occasions without a majority, therefore making that particular promise somewhat difficult to follow through on. It looks as though the Conservatives are going to give it another go on a couple of fronts. There's a private member's bill before the House of Commons brought forward by Gary Breitkreitz, Conservative MP, who's been a longtime critic of the gun registry, that would eliminate it. There's also Bill S5, I believe it is, going before the Senate, which seems to be a rehash, I guess, of a previous attempt by the government. Now, even to some groups, including the Canadian the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, put out a news release yesterday arguing that the government's bill before the Senate does not shut down the gun registry, that it would leave a registry by another name. It would still have more or less a firearms registry. The Gary Breitkreitz's bill, Bill C-301, does go farther. Do any of these bills, though, have a chance? It's still a Liberal-dominated Senate, which may answer that question. And even with Gary Breitkreitz's bill, it would still have to go through that same Senate. Michael Ignatieff seems to be indicating that his party is going to support the gun registry and therefore oppose both of these bills. But will it be a free vote? I guess that remains unclear. The Coalition for Gun Control is obviously in support of maintaining the firearms registry and is concerned about the government's plans. Joining us on the line from Toronto is Wendy Cukier, president of the Coalition for Gun Control, guncontrol.ca. Wendy, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, do you think, first of all, and it's, I guess, more of a political question, that either of these bills has much of a chance in Ottawa?
It's hard to say. I think it's important to understand that Gary Breitkreitz's bill goes much farther than just getting rid of the registration of rifles and shotguns. It relaxes the licensing provisions for all guns, including handguns and assault weapons, and it relaxes the authorizations to transport so that people would be able to take fully automatic machine guns to shooting ranges. And, of course, that's part of the reason why some of the shooting groups like his bill and don't much like the government bill that was deposited before the Senate, which strictly targets the registration of rifles and shotguns.
And what do you mean, relax?
In terms of the licensing provisions, basically extends the renewal period from 5 years to 10 to 12 years, and all but eliminates the authorizations to transport renewal process. And as I said, for many years, there's been a prohibition on taking fully automatic weapons anywhere. There was a grandfather clause when these weapons were prohibited in 1977, but you really couldn't take them out of your home. You couldn't load them. You couldn't shoot them except under very restrictive circumstances. And Mr. Breitkreitz's bill would allow people to take AK-47s to shooting ranges and fire them.
But we're talking about firearms that people are legally licensed and allowed to own.
Yeah, but we're talking about machine guns, which have been prohibited in Canada since 1977.
Okay, well, let's not confuse the issue. I mean, you're making it sound as though people are going to be transporting illegal guns around in their vehicles. We are talking about people who are in legal possession of legal guns.
Absolutely, but as I said, fully automatic weapons have been prohibited in Canada since 1977.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, obviously part of your news release was reacting not just to Gary Breitkreitz's bill, but to Bill or S5, I guess it is. So if the gun groups don't like it, wouldn't it stand to reason that your group might at some level?
No, we really take the side of the Canadian Association and Chiefs of Police and the Canadian Police Association, which represents frontline police officers, when they say the firearms registry is an important tool. Police use it on a regular basis. It helps them take preventative action, and it helps prosecute criminals.
Well, I mean, it certainly seems as though, I mean, at least the Police Association's been divided over this over the years, but at the same time, I mean, the Chiefs of Police Association supports the use of tasers. Reasonable people can take a different position. Just because the police say they want something doesn't automatically mean they get it.
No, but I mean, if you look at Canada's obligations under the United Nations and the international efforts to combat the illegal trade in firearms, part of that is a series of measures to allow tracing of guns when they're recovered in crime. Many people don't know, for example, that although an illegal gun was used in the Mayerthorpe killings of the 4 RCMP officers, the fact that a registered firearm was lent to the killer by one of the men recently convicted of being an accessory to that murder was part of the evidentiary trail that allowed the police to prosecute those 2 men. So there are lots of examples where information from the registry has been very helpful to police in prosecuting crimes. It's also been very helpful to the police in removing firearms from cases where there's a risk. Right after the Dawson College shooting, for example, there was another young man on the internet making threats. The police tracked him down, learned that there were firearms in his home, and were able to move in and remove the firearms and lay charges.
Okay, well, 2 points here. Hang on, 2 points here. I mean, you talk about the firearm that was loaned, that, yes, was registered, but once registered firearms are loaned to someone, the system doesn't necessarily track it, does it?
Well, the point is that this is precisely why you need the registry to hold firearm owners accountable for their guns.
Roscoe,
because if a legal gun owner gives their gun to a criminal and the gun is then found on the scene of a crime, they have a lot of explaining to do, and that's exactly what happened in the case of the 2 men who were convicted as accessories, because not only did they drive the killer back to the scene of the incident where he shot the 4 RCMP officers, but they also gave him a gun.
Well, and it wasn't registered to the person who gave it to Roscoe.
It was registered to his dad.
Someone else, or his grandfather, I think. Yeah, his grandfather wasn't charged with anything, right?
No, but what I'm saying is it was part of the evidentiary trail. It was part of how they actually were able to hold the two individuals accountable.
And that gun was never used. That gun was never used. We should note that as well. And the point you raised about the other individual, and this is a point Gary Breitkreutz and others have raised, that licensing would be sufficient. Once someone is licensed to own a firearm, that there's the background check, safety course, all of those requirements. That once someone is licensed to own a gun, if they are, for example, making threats about doing something, wouldn't licensing of the individuals suffice?
No, and that's another example that the National Weapons Enforcement Support Team cites is a case where they went on a domestic violence call. They asked the wife if there were guns on premise, and she said, yeah, he had a couple of rifles, and pointed to a gun case. They did a search on the registry and actually found, in addition, he had, I think, 7 or 8 registered handguns. So part of the problem is when the police execute prohibition orders or go to remove guns, if they don't know exactly what guns are supposed to be there, they're limited. The other thing is the issue of accountability, and again, it comes back to the Supreme Court decision which upheld the licensing of gun owners and registration of firearms, and explained that the registration system is actually important for enforcing licensing, because if you license gun owners but you don't hold them accountable for the guns that they can acquire, and there's no limit on the number of guns a licensed gun owner can get, there's no way of preventing those guns from being diverted. And the Lower Mainland, which has been the scene of a lot of gun crime recently, there was a study just done on the illegal movement of guns in British Columbia, and surprisingly found that many of the firearms recovered in crime had originated from legal owners. Many of the guns were traced back to dealers, for example, who were selling guns illegally, and to some movie prop companies that had special exemptions for the import of fully automatic weapons. So the police cite over and over cases where the registry has proved to be useful in tracking guns that are recovered in crime, and that's part of the reason they use it 10,000 times a day, and that's part of the reason why they're very clear that they don't want the government to proceed with this bill.
Okay, well, and that 10,000 times a day, I mean, this has gone from, it was 2,000 a few years ago, now it's 10,000. I mean, every single mundane adjustment of information, I mean, that's counted in that tally. I mean, let's be honest about where that number comes from.
Though a few years ago, not all police services were using it, and now there's much broader use across the country. I mean, all I can do is repeat what the police say, and they say that their assessment is these proposed legislations will jeopardize public safety.